Almost everything. Test. Okay, that works. Alrighty. So we are pretty close to the end of the semester. I think we only got 4 classes left. There will be 2 this week and then 2 next week, and then there will be, I think that's it. Is that right? Okay, nobody cares, right? Nobody has looked at the schedule. All right, let's check the schedule just to be sure.
Pretty sure it's on the Moodle site as well.
Yeah. Yep, the final is on the either the 16th or the 17th. All of my exams fall into those 2 days. But we just want to be sure. Schedule of classes, go to the final exam. Okay, so the final exam starts on the 12th, which means the 11th is the last day that we still have lectures. So that will be next Wednesday. Okay, so we got classes this week, we got classes next week, and then on next Wednesday, I'll give you a practice final so that you guys will have an idea of what type of question I'll be asking in the final. Obviously, it's not going to be an exclusive list of what kind of question I'll be asking, but I will just say that it is representative. In other words, I will just tell you what questions I asked last semester. There's no guarantee of what I'll be asking this semester. Okay. Any other questions? Yep.
On that practice test, are you going to put a pre and post conditions question?
I always have at least one pre and post condition in the final exam.
Okay.
So I can give you the final exam of the previous semester that I have taught this class, which is actually a few years ago, about maybe a year and a half or so ago. And then, office hours. You want to know about the office hours? So if you go to the interactive syllabus, it should be there. It should be the last, not the last section, it should be around here. Let's see, that's just the class information. This is actually my office hour. Excuse me. These are my office hours, and I still have office hours at these times. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday is from 8 to 9, and then on Tuesday, Thursdays it's from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. But I'm usually available after this class as well, so if you just kind of follow me back to the office, that works too. Occasionally, I might have some other stuff, just schedule right after, but most of the time it's okay. Okay. Sorry?
What was the time on the final?
Oh, the mic just cut out. Oh. Well, as it turns out, I did not steal fresh batteries. I stole the batteries, but they're not fresh. So they are not particularly useful. I forgot to bring my own rechargeable batteries this morning. I did that to another class, but I forgot to bring my own rechargeables today. So they have to kind of figure out a way to fix this problem. Okay, final exam time is, I think, at the very bottom.
It's at the very top.
Oh, is it? Sometimes you wonder whether I actually wrote this or not. It's like, thing is, oh, there we go. On the 16th, so it's on a Monday, and the start time is 12:45. End time is 2:45. So make sure that you It's not the same as the class time itself. Okay, it's also a 2-hour period, not a 80-minute period. The format's going to be the same though. It's going to be open book, open notes. Everything has to be on paper, so no electronic stuff to help you, unless you can use a calculator if you want to, just like all the other exams. Any questions in particular for the final exam? Nobody wants to ask whether it's comprehensive or not?
I know it is. So it's just going to be like binary search and arrays.
It will be every topic that we have gone over. Yep.
How many questions?
How many questions? It will be appropriate for the duration. I have not decided yet. So depending on the complexity of the question, it might vary. Okay. All right. So with this out of the way, we will continue to talk about records. Okay, so this is one of the last few topics that we have to go over. This one is actually kind of important as well. So let me just kind of open up this. This is where we are at this point. We are on topic 9 at this point. And this is the notes for that topic. This topic is about something that it doesn't seem important, okay, types and records, but it is actually very important because it leads to object-oriented programming, which some of you have exposure to, and you say, wow, that's actually important stuff, okay? Because most modern programming languages are object-oriented. If you look at C++, the plus part of C means it is object-oriented. C itself is not, but C++ is. Java is object-oriented. PHP is object-oriented. Python is object-oriented, and so on and so forth. So, but this is the precursor to object-oriented programming. So, I'm not teaching exactly object-oriented programming, but you need to understand this stuff first before you can get into object-oriented programming. So this is about passing values without the use of records. Okay, so instead of just going through this example, which is important, so it is important that you guys read the notes. Okay, either prior to the class if you can do it, or after the class if you cannot read it prior to the class. But reading notes is an important part of taking this class, and I can actually see who has not read the notes. You guys want to see how I do that? Because in Moodle, it's actually pretty easy. I'll show you guys. I'll show you as much as I can without disclosing, grades of people. So you can go to. You cannot, but I can go to. Let's see here. It's under course administration somewhere. There you can see, nope. Well, it should be here somewhere. Reports, that's it. And I can look under activity report or course participation, but activity report is a good one. And let's pick something. So I can see how many views people have gone through, how many clicks. So this way there's no private information. I cannot tell who has and who has not done it. There's another report where I can do it. So this is actually pretty healthy. Well, that's good. People actually want to know what grade they're getting. So this is good. And 37 clicks on types and records. So that's good. Okay, many of you have read the notes prior to the class. Good job. Okay. All right. So instead of starting out to talk about actual programming with types and records, I'll just give you an analogy of what life is like without records. Okay, and this is a real life example. It's not even programming. So what we'll do is we'll get a form of some kind. Okay, so we'll go onto the internet and find a form that you guys know about already. Let's find an enrollment form. Okay, enrollment form for a particular college. And we'll go through some images. Just pick on the first one. Okay. All right, so here's a form, and I just want to magnify the form itself here. Okay, does that look like a particularly complex form to you? It's just kind of like about average, okay? And in a form, what do you see? You see, how do you call this part? Okay, I can't really click it, but how do you call just this part here? It's a field, right? It's a field or an empty space or a blank space for you to fill in something, okay? And how can, if I want to tell people and say, oh, be careful to use, the correct casing, uppercase, lowercase, for that particular field, how do I identify that field? The field itself has a name, which is, coincidentally, name, exactly. So the field itself has a name, but of name here, okay? So this is how I can differentiate a field from another field. I can say, oh, be careful about the name field. You want to make sure that you use the correct cases, or I might want to tell you that you can only use certain characters for your last name and your first name. Okay? Maybe the apostrophe is allowed, a dash or a hyphen is allowed, but maybe the @ sign you cannot use it as a part of your name. Now, with the internet, maybe some people will start to use the @ sign as a part of their name. I will not imagine why, but I don't see why not either. Okay? Pound sign, the @ sign, I can see people eventually integrating those into their names too. Or I can tell you, with date of birth, okay? That's the name of the field. I can tell you which part we want to focus on, and I can tell you if you were born on the 29th of February, you just want to make it, like one day before. Maybe not all systems can handle that and check it correctly. Okay. So this is a form. Now go ahead and think about a world without forms. So what would that be like? Instead of one big piece of paper with all of these individual fields to fill in, now I'll give you a pile of little slips of paper. Okay, one little slip of paper just to fill in your name. Another slip of paper just for your social security number. Another one for your date of birth, another one for your email address, another one for your home address, home phone number, another one for your work phone number, and so on. Just on this form by itself, how many little slips of paper are we talking about? Let's just do a rough counting here. Okay, we're talking about 1, 2, I'm not even counting citizenship, okay? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I'm counting address as 1. 7, 8, and then we have 9. Okay, we have 9 little slips of paper. What would be the problem with that in real life? Instead of giving you one form that has multiple fields on a single piece of paper, I give you 9 little slips of paper.
We'll lose one of those slips.
It's easy to lose one, and if you run into another student with also a pile of little slips of paper like that, and you guys can run into each other, you threw all the little slips of paper onto the ground, and you pick it up, it's pretty hard to find out which one is whose, right? Okay. But if it's all in a form, it can still happen, right? But you just pick up the form, look at the name, and go like, okay, this one is yours, the other one is mine, done. Does that make any sense? But how does that relate to programming?
Your math variables don't exponentially increase.
Okay, that's right. And a lot of variables may be related in some way. Okay, they belong to a bigger, I don't want to use the word structure, but they belong to a bigger organization, okay? Can somebody name a few things that are just like that, okay? If you have read my notes, you already know some examples. Can someone name certain types of things that has individual components? Sometimes you want to use the individual components, and other times you want to kind of look at the whole thing and go like, oh, this whole thing, let's treat it as one thing. Other times you want to look at each individual component and go like, okay, let's look at just that component of this thing. So can someone give me an example? Some of those examples are here already on the projector, but you don't have to use those. Okay, look at the date of birth.
Just about any database.
Any type of data has, a feature like that, but there are certain things we are familiar with, like how we represent a date. How do you represent a date as a person?
I go year, month, day.
Year, month, day, which is a typical way that people, want to, write or represent, a date. Okay, so, but how does that relate to what I'm talking about right now? It has three components. A single date, which is a single item, has three components. It has the year, it has the month, and then it has the day of month. And those components, sometimes we want to look at those components individually, and other times we want to combine the whole thing and say, okay, this is the date of enrollment, okay? This is your birth date. This is the date when you got your driver's license, and so on. And we also want to do operations on dates, like comparing two different dates. Is date one before date two, or the other way around? Is that making any sense? So let's just use an example like that, and let's see whether we can write a subroutine just to compare two dates, but without the use of records. Okay? So let's see how we can do that without the use of records. I'm going to use a spreadsheet to do it, but I may not end up tracing this one. Okay. All right. So I want to say define subroutine. And I'm calling the subroutine is before because I'm going to give it two dates. I'm asking whether the first date is before the second date. So by value. Oh, by the way, how many parameters do I need to compare two dates? 6 individual components, because we have the year of date one, we have the month, date one month, we have date one day of month, and then we have the same thing for date two. By val, date 2 year, date 2 month, date 2 day of month. So now we have 6 parameters. And when you think about what type of value can go into each parameter, what type of values are we talking about? Are they characters? Are they text in nature? Or are we talking about numbers?
Numbers.
They're usually numbers. Sorry?
Depends on how you want it,
Yeah, most of the time we want to use numbers because that makes it easier to compare. Okay, and also we don't have to do translation. Okay, so let's say these are numbers. Okay, what makes would it be easy for people to pass information in the wrong order, since they're all numbers, right? The year, month, day of month format is used internationally, but not in the United States. In the United States, how do we organize the fields of the date? Month, day, and then the year. It makes more sense if it's year, month, day, because it's just a whole lot easier to compare, right? Because you just look at the first number first. If the first number tells you the ordering, you don't have to bother with the rest. Okay, but I don't know why somebody decided, okay, let's use month, day, and then the year, which doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. Okay, but it is easy for people to pass the wrong information because they don't remember which one is which one. So in here, then we have to use the actual individual, components and do the comparison. So we'll just kind of go through the logic of comparing two dates and see how we can do this comparison. How would you do it? Exactly, you start with the biggest one first, which is year. Okay, so you have to compare the year. So you say, okay, is this an easy one? Is the year of date one less than the year of date two? Because if it is, we're done. We have the answer. Okay? If that is the case, you return true, because this particular subroutine is supposed to return a Boolean of whether the first date is before the second date. Okay, if that is not the case, what do you do? If the year of the first date is not less than the year of the second date, what do you do? Sorry? Well, you have two possible cases, right? They can be equal or they can be greater than. Greater than is the easy one, because if the year is greater than the second, if the year of the first date is greater than the year of the second date, you also have a conclusion of false. Okay, so that's the easy one. It's when they equal to that you cannot quite decide right away what to do with it. So we'll just say, okay, we'll handle the easy case again. And I'm going to take a shortcut here and use else if, because this way it's just easier to organize the program. So if the year of the first date is greater than the year of the second date, then you return false because you already know the answer. So in the case of, okay, they're the same, then you have to use the month to determine the ordering. But it's going to be about the same thing. You basically say if the month of the first year is before the month of the second date, then you can return true here, because by the time we get here, it is clear that the years are the same. So 2 dates have exactly the same year, one has an earlier month, so that means whichever one has an earlier month is an earlier date. And this is also where it starts to become obvious that indentation is useful, because without indentation, I mean, you can work it out to see that this is the if inside the else of the outer conditional statement, but it takes work, okay, to try to match all the if and whatnot just to find out that this is a substatement of the overall statement. And then we'll use the same logic here. If date 1 month is greater than date 2 month, then we return false for sure, because this time we have the same year, but the month of the first date is greater than the month of the second date. And then the else here is corresponding to the case when you have the year and the month being the same, so now you have to rely on the day of month to determine the order. Same logic here. If date 1 DOM is less than date 2 DOM, then you return true. Else if, well, the else part here really doesn't have much else to do. Else you can return false because there are no additional components to compare. And if, and if, and if. I think there are 3 levels. Okay. Do you think people write programs without indentation like what I have just done? Do you think students write programs like this in other classes at ARC? Typically, no. Okay, if I see programs turn in like this with no indentations whatsoever, and it compiles and it works correctly, one thing comes to my mind. Somebody copied it from somebody else and did a really lazy job at that too. Because there's no way I can write a program like this. I just wrote it, okay? But in 5 minutes, I would have problems tracking my own logic dealing with a program like this. So I cannot imagine anyone can actually write programs like this and keep track of the logic and be able to debug the program. So when I see programs turning like this, I get suspicious. Okay? Especially with the first. Now, if it doesn't work, it doesn't really matter, because programs that do not compile or do not work will get a 0 anyway. So that part does not bother me. Okay, so and define sub. All right, so let's put in some indentations here just so that we can see the overall logic. But I think this is a pretty good demonstration of why we need indentations. Okay, is that convincing or not? Or is there people here still convinced that indentations is not really useful? Okay. The compiler doesn't really care unless it is Python. In the case of Python, that's the only thing it relies on to know the structure of a program. All right, so indentation, 1, 2, and then we have this entire block indented, including this one.
What about the first if?
The first if is it doesn't need to be indented because it's at the same level as the bival, because they're all inside the subroutine. and then we have this. Just hold on a second. I will address that after I get all of this stuff done. Here we go. Another indent. Okay, yep, go ahead.
Just one question about indentation. Would the compiler in C care how you indent it?
Oh no, absolutely not. You can put everything on the same line and the C compiler would take it as well. You can combine all the lines into one single line, and the C compiler doesn't care. It does make it really hard for a person to read it.
Especially if it's written
Oh, if you have a lot of quotes and stuff like that, quotes, and then inside the double quotes you have semicolons, which is actually part of the C programming language, and that would make it very hard to read without the indentations and new lines and stuff like that. So this is the actual structure of the program with the indentations in, okay? All right, so, but when you call the subroutine to compare two dates, this is what it looks like, okay? So you say invoke, or you can say if invoke, okay, because it returns a Boolean, so the value of the subroutine can be used immediately for conditional branches. So you can say invoke is before, and then you have to supply the 6 pieces of information. In this class, the standard that I use, which is naming the parameters as you invoke a subroutine, makes it pretty clear, okay, of what you're dealing with, but it's also extremely verbose. So let's say we want to compare today with the exam date, okay? Let's see how we can call that. Today is 2016, that's the year, right? So that part goes to date 1 year. May is the month, so 5 goes into date 1 month. And today's date is what?
Second.
The second. Okay, so 2 goes to date 1 DOM. And the exam date is date 2 year is 2016. Oops, the other way around. 2016 becomes date 2 year. It is in the same month. 5 goes to date 2 month. And then it's on the 16th, so the 16 goes to date 2 DOM. Okay. I would say that's a pretty long and super verbose invocation. Okay, we have 6 parameters, but we also name each parameter in the invocation. But that's only by pseudocode. C, on the other hand, doesn't do that, okay? When you guys move on to C and C++, you will know that whoever invented C and C++, I showed you guys the picture of that guy, they like everything to be, what is the opposite of verbose? Concise, abbreviated, as short as possible. Okay, so as a result, you don't see the parameters. Okay, so when you do this in actual C and C++, instead of seeing 2016 is going into the parameter called date 1 year, this is all you see. You only see the numbers. Okay, so you only see the numbers like this. In other words, the names of the parameters are completely gone in the invocation, which also means if you pass a number to the wrong parameter, there's no telling. There's no way you can tell easily, and there's certainly no way for the compiler to tell, because all you're doing is this. In actual C, C++, Python, PHP, Java, most programming languages are like this. Okay, parameters are only identified by their position, but not by their names. So this way, if I turn the ordering of the parameters so that it follows the US date order with month, date of month, and then the year, you cannot even tell that you have been using it wrong. Because 6 numbers are just 6 numbers. Okay, you pass the 6 numbers in, there's no easy way to tell if you are passing it incorrectly. Is that okay?
Most of the languages also predefine what order at the top of their structure, at the top of their subroutine. They define the individual variables that you're
Right.
typing in.
But by the time you call, you cannot. It doesn't remind you which one is which one. as long as they're all integers, the compiler is happy about it. It's like they're all numbers, fine, okay? But this one doesn't even make sense. There's no such month as 2016. It doesn't care. An integer is just an integer, right? You can give it a negative number. It doesn't care about that either. Unless it's Ada, then it will check all kinds of stuff. Okay. So this code is okay, it works, but it does have some problems, okay? The first problem I have with this one is it has too many parameters, okay? I don't like to have to pass 6 parameters to compare 2 dates, okay? I want to be able to pass 2 parameters. This is the first date, this is the second date. Figure out how to do that inside the interior of the subroutine, but I only want to pass 2 things to the subroutine, okay? All right. So that's why we have, records. A record is basically a user-defined type where you can say this thing has these components, okay, and they're identified by names, okay. All right. So now we will take a look at something. Okay, we'll get rid of this line here, which is just a demonstration of how you call the subroutine. So this time I'm going to give you a record definition. So in this class, I'm just going to use record and then a name as the record definition. So I'm defining a record called date. And this particular D starts with an uppercase because that's the convention. Okay, when you define your own record type, or later on when you define your own class in object-oriented programming, the convention is you use an uppercase letter as the first letter of the name. It is not a requirement. The compiler doesn't really care, okay? But it is a convention that you start with the uppercase when you define the name of a structure or the name of a class. How many components do we have in a date again? 3 components. The first one is a year, okay? And the second one is, okay, I'm starting also to use this notation of a colon, okay? So year is an integer, month is an integer, and then day of month is also an integer, and record. So I'm going to use some indentation here just to make it visual that we have components. Year is an integer, month is an integer, day of month is an integer. This is the first time that I've introduced the colon notation, which it means, in this case, year cannot be a boolean. It cannot be a string. It cannot be text information. It has to be an integer. It cannot even be a decimal number. Okay? It cannot be a fraction. It has to be an integer. So I'm starting to place restrictions on items. Okay? All right. Okay, now that we have date here, how do we make use of this record type? In other words, I have just defined something called date, okay? But what exactly is this record that I have defined? I cannot use it right away, okay? This is a cookie cutter. So let me ask you one thing. Most of the time when you're hungry, do you want cookies or do you want cookie cutters? It's about lunchtime. I think this is probably an appropriate question. So you're hungry. Do you want a cookie or do you want a cookie cutter? You want a cookie, not a cookie cutter, because a cookie cutter is not useful. It has no calorie. It has no nutritional value. You cannot eat it.
It might be high in iron.
Yeah, well, if you're a vendor, maybe it's useful, right? Vendor can do it. But if you're human, a cookie cutter doesn't do any good. Record, the record definition called date is a cookie cutter, which means normally it just sits in a drawer doing nothing. What do you use a cookie cutter for if you cannot eat? If you cannot eat a cookie cutter, what do you use a cookie cutter for? To cut out cookies, right? That's why it's called a cookie cutter. So now I'm going to present you the same algorithm, but this time it is going to use the cookie cutter. In fact, I'm going to call it slightly different. So define sub is date before. And this time I have 2 parameters. I only got date 1 as 1 parameter. I got date 2 as another parameter. okay, but that doesn't seem to be useful because if I only have two parameters, what about the individual components? And by the way, what is this parameter date1? So now we start to use the colon notation to say that this is a bi-value parameter, but we also want to add to that point and to say that this is not an integer, this is not a string, this is not a boolean, this is a date. So we say colon date. And the same thing with date2. These are not the usual types anymore. These are not numbers, they're not strings, they are composites. Okay, each one is a date itself. So what I just did here is I used the cookie cutter named date with an uppercase D to cut out two cookies. The first cookie is called date1 with a lowercase d, and the second one is called date2 with a lowercase d. Is that okay? Is that analogy working? Yep.
Can you pass the 2 as arrays instead, the 2 dates as?
You can, but that means you also have to arrange everything into an array first. So in this case, I would much rather use separate parameters to do it. All right, so let's repeat that same logic and see how we can, come up with conclusions. And I'm going to change the logic just a little bit this time too. So the first one that I want to do is I want to say if date1 year does not equal to date2 year, then we'll do something, okay? Oh, but wait, tech, there's no such thing as date1 year anymore. We only have two parameters. One is called date1, the other one is called date2. We don't have a parameter called date1 year. We don't have another parameter called date2 year. Okay, bummer. But do we still have that information within the parameters that we do have? Because date1 is a date, and inside a date is the year, month, and then day of month. Okay, so the notation to do that, to refer to the year component of date1, is like this. It's not really surprising. The notation may look strange the first time, but after this, it's not really too bad. Okay, same thing for date2. So we use a dot notation. Okay, let me just kind of zoom in here a little bit. So what we do, I want to show the date definition along with the use of that definition. So when you look at row 34, which is the actual comparison, this is basically saying the year component of date1, which is our parameter, compared to date2, or the year component of date2. If they are different, then we will do something. Is that okay? So we still only have two parameters, but since each parameter is a date, is a structure or a record, there are many ways you can call that. I can now refer to components of each parameter and say, okay, we're not looking at the entire thing. This time we only want to pick out one item of the structure to compare. Is that okay? Okay. So I'm making this logic a little bit simpler. And if I know that the year component is different between the two dates, then I can just return this. Date1.year is before date2.year. I'm actually simplifying the logic compared to the previous implementation. This one will be shorter compared to the previous one. Is that okay? Well, I say 2 lines. It's because we are returning a boolean. You're absolutely right. Now the other thing that we can also do, but this one I have not done it so far, is you can also identify what type of thing the subroutine itself is returning. So I can add this notation here, use a colon notation to basically indicate the subroutine is date before, is not returning an integer, is not returning a numerical value, it is returning a boolean, it's returning something that is either true or false. Okay? So I'm putting a type on everything now. Okay? Every single individual item inside the record has a type, every parameter has a type, even the subroutine that returns a value has a type now. Okay? All right, so we'll go ahead and finish this logic, put in the indentation, just so that we are done with this one. So the else can only be one case where the years of the 2 days are exactly the same. Then we can replicate that logic, but this time apply to month. If the months are different, even though the years are the same, then we can use the same logic and just return date1.month is less than date2.month. Else, which means the months are exactly the same. So this time we have the year being the same, the months being the same. We can only rely on DOM, or the day of month in this case. So we only have one single return here to basically say if date1.dom is less than date2.dom, then return true. For everything else, we return false. And if.
But it doesn't work in the case if they're the same day.
What?
You're missing the case where they're the exact same day.
No, I did not.
Because it's not over yet.
If they are the same, then we still return false. Okay, let's double check. Let me fix the indentation first because I cannot read this code without indentation.
I mean, it'll return false.
Yeah, which is correct. Okay. Now I can do this retroactively just because I came up with this logic to begin with, and even with that I missed one thing. Because there's one extra and if here that should not be here. Okay, does that look right to you? If and if and if. It's all good? Yep, looks good to me. How would you test a subroutine like that? In fact, in general, if you know the source code, if you know this is the subroutine, how do you test it? If you already know, you can see the code, how do you test it? How do you come up with test cases? Yep, go ahead.
If you know the code, then you can come up with integers for the dates where you know what you're going to get, and then see if the program gives it what you expect.
Yep, and you want to test all the branches.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the bottom line. Is so you're right. Okay, so you want to test to make sure that it does work correctly. But if all of your test cases only exercise one particular branch, like they all have the year of the first date less than the year of the second date, then you're not exercising the other branches, which means, yep, we can be fairly sure that one of the branches work correctly, but what about the other branches? So when you design test cases, what you need to do is look at each branch, okay, each branch, which is like line 35, and say, okay, I want to test this line and see whether it works correctly or not. So you need to create two test cases in this case just to test this one line, because I get the line, row 35, as long as the year of the first date is not the same as the year of the second date. So you actually have two individual test cases already on this line. If they're equal, then the test cases will go into here, which means when the years are the same, then you have to test the month. Once again, we have two test cases over here, and then with two more test cases over here. So to test this program correctly, I need to create at least 6 individual test cases to cover all the possible branches. Yep.
Is there a reason why you don't just compare the sum of year, month, and day of month?
The sum.
Say you were to take 2016, 5, and 2, sum of that, and just compare the sum of the dates instead of
Okay, I see exactly what you mean. That makes sense, and it will work as well. Okay, so I know what you're saying. You're basically saying compare this. Okay, return date1.year times 1,000, 100,000, 10,000 plus date1.month times 100 plus date1.dom, and then do the same thing on the other side. So you turn each one into a number, and then just compare the two numbers. That would work.
but then you have to do all the multiplications, which is actually expensive. The other one does not involve any type of multiplication, so it's actually less expensive. Now, when you're running this on the Pentium i7 type of processor, it makes no discernible difference because multiplication is relatively inexpensive when you have a pretty powerful 64-bit processor. But when you're doing this on a Arduino, it will make a difference because on an Arduino you have very limited resources to begin with. There's no hardware multiplier, which means every time you do any type of multiplication, it's expensive. So you're right. Okay, you can work out this. You can work it out in different ways too. Yep. Okay, so are we doing okay so far in terms of both the logic of how to compare two dates, as well as how to make use of the record type called date? Is that okay, or are there questions about this example? Yep, go ahead.
I understand what you're saying about the logic, but I'm wondering on line 34, if date 1 is greater than date 2, or date 1 year is greater than date 2 year, why are we returning date 1 year less than date 2 year?
Okay, so if the year of the first date is greater than, it will still be not different to, right? So we will still get to this line here. We'll still get to line 35. But line 35 is returning the result of a comparison, so that means it will return false when the year of the first date is greater than or equal to the year of the second date. Because, okay, let me emphasize. Because this part is a comparison.
Okay.
It's either true or false, right? We want the subroutine itself to return either true or false, whether the first date is before the second date. So this will take care of it.
Okay, so that's not like saying 1 is less than 2, it's asking.
It is correct.
Okay.
In programming, when you see comparison, it is always asking.
Okay.
It's always there are always two possible outcomes when you do comparison in programming. It is always either returning true or false. It is never an assertion that a number is less than another number.
Okay.
Unlike in math, when it can mean one or the other. It can be an assertion. We assume this number is less than the other number. In programming, it is always asking, is it true or false that this number is greater than the other number? Okay? Any other questions? Well, what is the advantage of the second version of this code?
Easier to write.
Easy to write and easy to organize. Because when you call, you only have two parameters. You cannot, well, you can still mess up date 1 versus date 2, but it's much harder. Okay, because you don't have 6 numbers to juggle. You only get 2 things to juggle. Okay. All right, so let's check out how we can actually call is date before from another subroutine and make use of this particular thing. So we define the main subroutine here. In the main subroutine, we have 2 variables, each one being a date. So we have D1 being a date. This is a local variable D1, which is a date. We have another local variable D2, which is also a date. So the first thing we need to do is to initialize these 2 variables. So we say D1.year is 2016, D1.month is, well, let's make it May. D1.dom is today, which is the 2nd. D2.year is 2016. D2.month is 5, which is May. D2.dom is 16, so it's the 16th. So this is how we initialize variables that are records. Okay? You cannot initialize the whole thing in one single swoop, which is kind of handy if that is possible. But individually, when you have to initialize each individual item or each component individually. Yep.
Using full set of assignment arrows?
Oh,
Doesn't matter to me, I understood what you meant, but.
I understand that, but it's for consistency. I should be using the symbol that I've been using in this class, which is that. Sorry about that. Yep.
Don't confuse it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The semicolons, does that more or less mean it is?
Semicolon?
Yeah.
You mean colon?
Like, oh yeah, colon. Sorry.
Okay, the colon means is a.
Is A.
So, since this is pseudocode, I could use that too.
And are they linear? So say, you say, record date, here's integer. And
Yeah.
then you say,
Everywhere you see the colon, it is basically is a. It's stating the relationship between the thing on the left hand side and the thing on the right hand side. The thing on the left hand side is usually the identifier of a variable or a component inside the record, and then the one on the right hand side is a type. So integer is a type.
so my question is, so everything inside of date is defined as an integer.
It just so happens that way, correct?
Yeah, that's what you.
But they don't have to.
But, and then later on, you use date to define something else. So does that also mean that what you're defining with date has to be true for what date
Correct.
defines? Okay.
Yes, because the way I define date as a cookie cutter, so that basically forms the shape of a particular kind of cookie, right? So that also means that date one being a date is it's forcing date one dot year to be also an integer. Is that making any sense?
Yeah, I was just
Okay.
making sure.
It's a template. Okay, a record is basically a template or a cookie cutter. So all the restrictions that we put into the cookie cutter applies to everything that we use it to cut out. So all the cookies that you cut out using date would have the same restrictions as the date itself. Yep, that's a good question. Any other questions about what the syntax and also the meaning, the semantics of how to use a record? No questions? This is all okay so far? Okay.
How do you trace a record?
How do we trace a record? Very good question. Let's do that. Yep, go ahead. I'll answer that question before we
I was
trace it.
going to ask something. Are we just going to be given a set of variables as like we have with different traces before, or how is it?
A set of variables.
Or a set of values?
A set of values.
Like a date. Would you give something similar to this, like a date? Or
You mean something that's pre-initialized or initialized in the subroutine itself like that? So we can do this. So let's take a look at this program first. So we'll say, if date, if this time the invocation is a lot easier, is date before, and then we use D1 to specify date 1. We use D2 to specify date 2. Now remember, D1 and D2 are the names of the local variables. Date 1 and date 2 are the names of the parameters. Okay, and they're passed by value in this case. Then print no need to study yet. There we go. Else print start panicking. There we go. And if and define sub invoke main. There we go. Alright, so let's fix all the indentations, and now we can start to trace this code. Now this is really kind of a longer program, so there'll be some scrolling around. There'll be a lot of scrolling around, I can guarantee you that. We don't need the first definition, so I'm going to take out the first one just because they're not needed, or at least I will hide them. So you can hide rows in the spreadsheet, which means it doesn't show, but it's really still there. Okay, so here's the actual code, and then we'll trace it using the second sheet, using a new window as well. This one's going to be a little bit tough to follow because we have to kind of scroll a lot between the two screens.
probably zoom out a little bit if you wanted to.
Yeah, well, at least with the trace window, we have to zoom out a little more. Well, we'll do that when we need to. All right, so we'll start with comments because we do have conditions to evaluate. We know that we need the comments column. We got line number. First of all, are there any global variables? How can we identify whether there are global variables or not? That's the first question. You check all the names, right? You check all the names, especially ones outside of the subroutine definition. But the only line outside of the definition of the subroutine is line 34, which is just invoke main. So it does not imply anything about global variables. So we are clear as far as that one is concerned. But you still have to check inside each subroutine. Okay, inside main we refer to the names D1 and D2, but they are clearly local variables. So we're good with that. And then inside the other subroutine we have date 1 and date 2, but since those are by value parameters, so those two are fine as well. So we don't have any global variables in this case. Okay, so that means the only thing we have to do when we execute, so there's nothing to say about the precondition because there are no global variables. On line 34, we invoke main, so we need one single column for the return line number, which reminds us to go back to post. But we have two local variables in this case. We have one local variable called D1, and then we have another local variable called D2. And you can see right away that I am already leaving a lot of spaces, a lot of columns in between. Okay, so we'll go ahead and kind of shrink these columns so it becomes more clear how many columns I have reserved. One more. That's good. Okay. Okay, so for D1, I'm reserving 3 columns, D, E, F. For D2, I'm also reserving 3 columns, G, H, I. That's because D1 by itself is a composite. It is not a single item. It is a composite of 3 individual components. Each component is an integer. Now in this class, we'll call an integer atomic, which means by the time you get to an integer, you cannot divide it into smaller chunks anymore. But specifically, I did say in this class, because in some other classes, an integer can still be broken up into individual bits. There are bitwise operations that can do that. But in this class, we're not going to do that. Okay? All right. But in terms of the notation, I don't want to just say, oh, D1 has 3 columns. I want to name these columns by their component name. So we have year, month, and day of month. I'm using MON just to save some space because I don't want the columns to be too wide. So we have year, month, and day of month. So this time when you look at this, D1 really is not just column D. D1 is columns D, E, F. D2 is actually referring to columns G, H, I. If I refer to D1 all by itself, I am referring to columns D, E, F. If I refer to D1.year, then I'm just only referring to column D. Okay, so sometimes I can refer to all 3 columns at once. Other times I can refer to just one of the 3 columns. And since they are local variables, they all start with unknown values. So now we have 6 unknowns, okay? Because each individual item inside a record is independent to all of the other items. So when we say, oh, we don't know what date 1 is, you cannot just say 1 single question mark. You have to say 3 question marks, 1 for each individual component. So inside the subroutine main, we start execution on line 22. So line 22 to line 27 should be fairly boring, even though they are important. Because line 22 is just saying, okay, let's go ahead and initialize the year component of D1, which is column D. So line 22 turns this one into 2016. Line 23 turns this one into 5. Line 24 turns this one into 2. Line 25 turns this one into 2016. Line 26 turns this one into 5 again. And then line 27 turns this one into 16. Are there any questions at this point about the initialization of the 2 variables? Each variable being a record itself, having 3 individual components. Is that okay so far? notation-wise, semantic-wise, they're both okay. All right. Okay, so on line 28, we have a subroutine call that looks like this. Okay, I'm not sure whether we have seen anything like this before, having an invoke in the middle of the condition of a conditional statement. Maybe not, but would that bother you? Would that change the mechanism of how we do things? Not a single bit. Okay, not a single bit, because can we do this conditional branch right now? Do we know which way to go? Should we go to line 29 or 31? The answer is no, because we have not invoked the subroutine. We don't know whether it is a true or a false. So we cannot make a decision yet. So what is the first thing to do? Invoke the subroutine, right? Okay, so we have to invoke this subroutine. What is the convention again for something that looks like line 29? Okay, so we have to allocate a column called return info. Why not return line number? Because we have to get back onto the same line to finish some unfinished business. Okay, so a return info is for that purpose. And what do we need to specify here? Which line are we going back to? Line 28. And what else do we have to do once this invocation is completed? Hey, we can then decide which way to go, because then we'll have a value, a true or a false. So the question mark, it becomes like this. Does that make sense? Is that consistent with how I described what to do when you call a subroutine that returns a value? The invocation itself turns into a question mark, which is a placeholder for the return value. But you don't change anything else on that line. If it is an assignment statement, you don't do a single thing about the assignment itself. If it's a return statement, you don't do a single thing about the return itself. If it's a conditional statement, you don't do a single thing about the conditional statement itself. All you do is to replace the invocation that you're doing with a single question mark, which is just a placeholder. Are we still doing okay so far with this stuff here? Okay? So this is the application of something that you have learned already. The two things involved, a conditional statement and the invocation of a subroutine that returns a value, those were introduced separately. But this is the integration. This is saying, okay, I taught you guys how to use a vice grip. I taught you guys how to use a power drill. This is the time when you say, oh, I have to drill something that is either too hot or it is thorny, or it's for whatever reason I cannot use my hand to hold it. Well, use a vice grip to do this part. But I need to drill a hole. Well, use a power drill on your other hand. So that's a combination of the concepts. Okay? All right. Well, we still have parameters. Now, this part I do have to explain first. Even though some of you may have a pretty good idea of what is going to happen, this part I do have to explain, because the combination of using a record as a parameter passed by value, well, that one it does require a little bit of explanation. Okay, we have two parameters. We have date1 as a parameter, and then we have date2 as a parameter. Okay, and you can see that it's the same deal. Okay, they have, each one has 3 columns allocated, and I'm going to shrink the width of the columns a little bit just so that we can see them a little bit more easily. Okay, so now we have that. So now the question is, what do we specify here? Oh, that's the easy part. What is a date1? Let's look it up. A date1, according to the program, is a date. A date2 is also a date. Okay, which means they have they have those 3 components. So we name those 3 components. We have year, month, day of month, year, month, day of month. Okay, but since date1 and date2, unlike d1 and d2, are not local variables, they are passed by value parameters. What is the main difference between a passed by value parameter as opposed to a passed by value parameter? Take it back, sorry. There won't be any difference if you guys are paying attention. There won't be any difference. What is the difference between a pass by value parameter as opposed to a local variable?
It's pre-initialized.
It's pre-initialized and the values are specified by the invocation itself. So let's check out the invocation again, which is on line 28. How do I specify date 1? I use D1 to specify date 1. I use D2 to specify date 2. So if I go back to the trace, what is D1 at this point? D1 has 2016 5.2 as the individual values, and then D2 has 2016 5.16 as the individual values. Those get copied, okay? Passing by value, when you imagine passing by value, imagine a copier, a Xerox machine. That's because that's what it does. 2016 5 to 2016 5.16. So that's how we represent the individual components when we pass a record by value. Is that okay? Yep.
Assuming the records are the same type.
Correct. If they're not of the same type, then we have a bigger problem. And oops. O, E, M. There we go. Okay, I'm just emphasizing that date 1 is not just column K. Date 1 as a parameter is actually specifying column K, L, and M. And then date 2 is actually specifying columns N, O, and P. Is that okay so far? Okay, so now we can get into the subroutine and actually do something about it. All right, and it's hard to track the code because it's too wide, but I can still use this feature to separate so I can focus on one part of the spreadsheet at a time. Okay, so that's a little better, but I need comments in this case as well because I need to indicate the result of the comparisons. All right, so we are now starting on line, back here, we're starting on line 9 now. Okay, because this is inside the subroutine is date before. So line 9 is a comparison. It wants to compare date 1.year and see if it is different from date 2.year. Is it true or is it false? If you just look at the screen right now, that's false. Okay, that's good. Which means where do I need to go next? We need to go to the else, but I don't trace the else itself, so the next line is line 12, okay, very good. So line 12 is asking a question to, similar, but not exactly the same. Date 1.month is different from date 2.month is false, which means where should we go? Which line are we going to? Line 15 is correct, okay, so we go to line 15, and line 15 is just, returning the result of a comparison. Is the DOM component of date 1 less than the DOM component of date 2? Well, let's check. The DOM component of date 1 is 2. The DOM component of date 2 is 16. 2 is less than 16 is?
True.
True. All right, so we are returning true. And what do we do when we return a particular value? The same boring stuff that we have been doing for the past, few weeks, okay? You copy, paste the return info cell, we replace the question mark with whatever value that we are returning. Okay, that sounds easy. Oh, by the way, what value am I returning here?
True.
True. Well, can we actually substitute a question mark with a true? It's not a number. Absolutely. Whatever value you're returning, replace the question mark with that value. So true, false are just values. They're not integers, but they're still values. So you replace it with a T. Is that okay? All right. And after line 15, where do we go? Look at the source code here. After line 15, we get out of the inner conditional statement. But since that is the only thing of the else branch of the outer conditional statement, we also get out of the outer conditional statement, which means we'll get to line 18. And on line 18 is the end define sub. Same boring stuff that we usually do. First of all, we make a note of where to go to continue execution. So in the class, I just copy and paste the return info cell, but in the test, you can just say line 28. That's fine too, because otherwise you have to rewrite a lot of stuff, which is not good during the exam. Then we deallocate all of these columns. So we just copy and paste the whole thing, right click here to indicate all of these are strike through, and they're deallocated. Now we are back to main. Can we make a decision now on line 28? Which way to go? Okay, but remember, every time you make a decision of which way to go, you have to write something in comments. In other words, you have to indicate what is the value of the condition. This one should be pretty easy to write. True is true. Does it change the way you branch in a conditional statement? Well, if it's true, you always branch to the then branch or the then statement, which in this case is print no need to study. Now, there's really no way for us to print something, so we just say, print, just repeat the whole thing, no need to study yet, because it's not quite the time of the exam. That's what we do on line 29. After line 29, we get out of the conditional statement. We get to line 33, which is the end of the main subroutine. Once again, we have to deallocate all the columns. But before that, we make a note of where to go to continue execution. Then we say, okay, all of these things are of no use at this point because we are at the end of an invocation. So you change the strike through of all of those. We continue execution at post, and we're done. We feel relaxed because it is before the date of the exam. Are there any questions about this trace? Because this trace, is reusing all this stuff that we have done before, but combining the concept of records into the whole thing. Is that okay? Are there any questions, both in terms of syntax and also in terms of semantics, which is the meaning behind the syntax? Well, let me do it now because I think sometimes I forget to do it. If I forget to do it and if I don't save the file, then it'll be lost.
Yeah.
Yep, which is not good.
I like being able to follow along while you're.
Yeah, well, this one is kind of more involved. It's not like an easy one, so I can see why this one would be a good one to put onto the. There's my Moodle page. We'll just make a new window for that. Well, starting with some of my other classes, I have also changed the way I teach my classes. So instead of using, well, in addition to using my document camera, I'm also going to use Google Documents as my class notes, so that way you guys can check it earlier, like view it before, and you can leave your comments behind, and then as we go through the material, I can see your comments, and then I can address those comments as we go through the material. But I haven't done it to this class just yet. So I'm just trying out different ways to do things. And we need to attach the file, upload, and that should be good. Well, we still have 5 more minutes, so I got some more topics to go over. Yep.
Is record outside of a subroutine useful, or outside of a subroutine?
They are useful. Okay, records is called, or it's called different names. Okay, in object-oriented programming, it's called a class. In C and C++, it's called a structure. But it's basically an encapsulation, mechanism. It's combining things into one logical unit. Okay, So it is useful regardless of whether it's used inside subroutines or not. Now with subroutines, it amplifies the effectiveness of using records, but even without subroutines, records can still help you organize your variables. Because you can see how in the case of representing a date, it can consolidate 3 variables into one. So even if you don't have subroutines, it will still help you organize the names of the variables. Okay?
One.
Yep.
Could I call a individual variable out of a record if I needed it?
Yes, but you have to identify which component of which cookie. So you have to name the cookie first, and then you name the component of that cookie. Okay? All right. So the next thing I want to do for the next 5 minutes has nothing to do with the actual pseudocode, because it is more about the discipline of programming rather than the syntax of programming. Okay? It's called detail highlight or abstraction. Okay? And it has to do with if you make changes to the implementation of something in your program, how much of the rest of the program is it going to impact? Okay? Now, depending on which approach programmers do, it can go in 2 directions. In one way, if you manage it well, you change the implementation detail of something, it can have 0 impact to the rest of the entire program. Everybody else, other than you making the changes, can remain unknown to, they don't have to know about the change. On the other hand, for certain other types of programming style, one little change to one little thing can propagate changes throughout the entire program and make a lot of people unhappy. So what I'll do, you can see that I'm holding a remote control because I'm going to use this as a prop. Okay? I can see most of you are probably old enough to remember CRT TVs, okay, the old tube type televisions. Yes? Okay. One of these days I won't have those students anymore. Everybody go like, what? CRT? What is that? It looks like a fish tank. No, I've never seen those before. Okay? But fortunately we still have enough people with that exposure. So you think about the old CRT TV and the prior to HD TV broadcast, the old broadcast thing. How do you change a channel on those old TV prior to HD TV? How do you change channel? Channel button. How do you change the volume, make it louder because your mom is asking you to do some chores?
Volume button.
Volume button, crank it up. Okay. Now that we have LCD TVs and HD TV broadcast, how do you do the same thing? Change channel, push a button, make it louder, press the button with the same icon, right? They have to change the icons. When you want to change the brightness of the picture in the good old days with a CRT, do you have to open up the television, find out which little knob would increase the bias voltage of the vacuum tube and crank it up, and risking yourself the exposure of like 400 volts of
As long as you don't lift the end of it, that's good.
As long as your hands are dry, it won't be too bad. Okay? Do you have to understand how a CRT works to use a television based on CRT technology? What about LCD? Do you have to understand the mechanism of LCD or liquid crystal display to change the brightness of the picture? Because the remote control and also the OSD, the on-screen display, are pretty much the same regardless of the technology. So there's a clear separation here. The remote control is the interface. It's the interface between the end user and the manufacturer says, please do not open up the TV, okay? I'll give you a remote control, do everything using the remote control. And also the technology behind the actual TV technology. So there's a clear separation, which is the interface. When you write programs, there's also the end user and also the implementation of the technology. They're both developers, but some developers develop subroutines used by other developers. And for the most part, most of us are quote-unquote the consumers. We are the quote-unquote end users. we only make use of certain subroutines and other utilities that is already provided to us. So now the question is, if the back end changes dramatically, do we have to make a lot of changes to our code to accommodate for those changes? That becomes the next question. I believe my notes talks about that, so I want you guys to read ahead to understand that particular philosophy, because it has more to do with programming discipline rather than programming concept. Okay, this has to do with how you organize your code more so than actual constructs in programming languages. So we are running out of time today. I can only talk to this point, so we'll pick this up on Wednesday.